Times Radio Early Breakfast.
Very good morning. It is 5:18 now on Tuesday morning. James Hanson here with you between now and 6 when Asma and Stig take over with Times Radio Breakfast. Shall we have a look at the front pages of this morning's newspapers? Let's start with the Times. Working at home boosts productivity, says Labour, is the headline. Business Secretary takes aim at presenteeism. This is Jonathan Reynolds, the Business Secretary, who's given an interview to the Times in which he has said that a default right to flexible working will make staff more productive and more loyal. He says that giving employees the right to work from home or ignore work emails and calls in the evening will make them more motivated and resilient. He's also criticised one of his Conservative predecessors, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who had been declaring war on people working from home. He stressed that there were real economic benefits to more flexible working. What do you think of that? Really keen to get your thoughts on that this morning. Where do you think you are more productive? Are you more productive working from home? Are you more productive in an office? I mean, the kind of work I do, I've literally got to come into the office. I can't present a radio show from home. I suppose technically I probably could. You could do it technologically these days, but it wouldn't be the same. But it does depend what the nature of your work is. And I might also suggest if you are self-employed, maybe you are more productive when you're at home because, I mean, you know, it's not in your interest to shirk a bit. If you are working for a big organisation, maybe you can bunk off slightly more easily if you're working from home. I don't know, do you agree? 0333 003 2353 is the number on WhatsApp. Start your message, please, with the word Times. Front of the Telegraph this morning, Starmer defiant over peers' freebies. PM says he follows all the rules as it emerges millionaire donor lent him house for election. The row over Victoria Starmer's free clothes continues. Front of the Guardian, suspect charged after apparent assassination attempt on Trump. Former president calls Biden and Harris enemy within after incident. FT this morning, Brussels lines up €40 billion loans package for Ukraine despite faltering G7 effort. Front of the Daily Mail, as Huw Edwards walks free despite horrifying new evidence of his crimes, disgraced, reviled, but not a day in jail. A lot of the papers discussing whether it is right that convicted paedophile Huw Edwards has avoided a prison term. Same story in the front of the Daily Express. Damning verdict on shamed former BBC presenter Huw Edwards as he avoids jail. Reputation in tatters over child abuse images. The Eye goes with Huw Edwards avoids jail over images of child abuse. The Sun says sickening. He called child sex pic amazing, but Edwards is not sent to jail. And the Daily Mirror this morning says Huw Edwards' shame appalling. A newsreader paid pedo for sickening child abuse images. We'll talk more about that story as well in a moment. But joining me now to have a further look at today's papers is barrister, broadcaster and futurist Andrew Eborn. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning, James. Always a joy to join you.
Let's begin with the story in the front of the Times. Working at home boosts productivity, says Labour. Is the Business Secretary right on this? Are you more productive, Andrew, when you're working from home?
Oh, I'm productive wherever I am, James. That's the honest truth. It all depends, as you so wisely said, what sort of job you do. If you're a plumber, and my good mate Charlie, who founded Pimlico Plumbers.
Charlie Mullins.
That's the one. I had him on my show, and he was sort of saying he's dead against this and this sort of workers' rights and so on and so forth. Yeah, I broadcast around the world, which I can do from the comfort of my home because I've got a little home studio and things like that. But it really depends. If you think people have got a long commute, which could be an hour, 2 hours into the office, backwards and forwards, being terribly, terribly stressed, there probably is an absolutely very good argument for doing it. But it all depends on the work you do. I come from a background, as you know, I'm a lawyer specialising in intellectual property. And having worked for a number of city firms, they would divide up an hour basically into 10. So you'd have to work in 6-minute units and justify that to the client. And you'd be charged zillions of pounds appropriately for that particular skill. I always made the point it's much better to say, well, how effective are you within that period of time rather than just doing it on the clock like a taximeter? And if I could get you the right answer within 2 minutes as opposed to 2 days, that's got to be worth much more than just trying to charge it on an hourly basis. So it's all about effectiveness, and I think it all depends. My view is it depends on the job. If you're more effective doing it, then absolutely, I think that's right.
Morning to Mark in Sussex, who says if you can do your job flexibly from home, remember that someone in India or South Africa can do your job more cheaply for an office in their country. Be careful what you wish for. Morning to Paul in Hove, who says What do you mean, James, you can't broadcast from home? During the pandemic, that's exactly what happened.
Yes.
And was it much different? From a listener perspective, not that much, to be honest. Your guests are dialing in from home, which is a fair point. You are dialing in from home right now, Andrew. I mean, you can
I
do
am.
a huge amount of stuff from home.
I've got a posh studio here. I've got green screens and everything. It's probably as equally lovely as Talk TV Towers, where you are, which I'll be visiting later. I'll come and do some TV shows from there later. But no, the reality is exactly that. It's about effectiveness. But your brilliant audience, and they are brilliant, are quite right. Be careful what you wish for, because jobs around the world will be able to be done by people who are much, much cheaper and maybe even better for some jobs. Also, AI, as I keep saying, I'm a big advocate putting the AI into Britain. That is going to be after your job as well. Goldman Sachs warned that 300 million jobs are going to be lost to AI. So be careful what you wish for.
What about this suggestion that employers will not be able to contact members of staff after work hours? They won't be able to email, or they might be able to email, but they shouldn't expect a reply to their email, and your boss shouldn't be allowed to call you once you've gone home or at the weekend, say. I mean, I suppose, look, you don't want your boss calling you at every waking hour and all the time over the weekend, but surely there will be exceptions where it is legitimate for them to get in touch.
Yeah, it all depends, again, on the job. What I love, James, is you were contacting me throughout the night, deciding what sort of stories we were going to talk about.
Well, I was messaging you at about 3 o'clock in the morning. I mean, is that reasonable?
I never sleep, as you know. So I was messaging you, as the stories break, I was messaging you throughout the night and so on and so forth. It all depends on your job. And if you're being paid to do a certain job and that requires you to be accessible, I think that's right. If you're not being paid, and this is the whole question about overtime and so on and so forth, if you're always on, then bear that in mind when you're discussing your package of benefits for the job that you do.
Now, dominating many of the front pages this morning is the sentencing of Huw Edwards. Obviously, he was given a suspended sentence yesterday, so he will not see the inside of a jail cell. And a lot of people discussing whether it is right that a convicted paedophile can avoid a jail term. Good morning to Jerry on WhatsApp, who says, "Morning, James. Huw is a disgraceful individual. However, I'm sure his sentence is within the sentencing guidelines." And my understanding of it, Andrew, is that, yes, his sentence is within the sentencing guidelines, but it does raise the question, are the sentencing guidelines appropriate in that case?
Yeah, you're as always, your listeners and viewers are absolutely right. There are very clear guidelines, and it's all set out by the Sentencing Council. And I always make the point that justice should not just be done, but seen to be done. And you might recall that the first ever sentencing remarks were broadcast on TV in the UK in July 2022, when Ben Oliver was televised from the Old Bailey, and he was given a sentence for the manslaughter of his grandfather. The whole idea of this is exactly that. People don't understand, other than having a massive headline, what it's supposed to be. But there is, and the particular sentence that Huw Edwards got is consistent with the Sentencing Council guidelines. And what it does, it sets out a certain tariff, if you like. It talks about Category A, Category B, and Category C images and these sort of things, and about possession, distribution, and production, and how serious it is for that. And they have, as I say, these tariffs. And then what the judge has to do when sentencing the particular person is to say, well, are there aggravating factors, and basically those aggravating factors such as previous convictions or committed while on bail or failure to comply with a current court order, offences, how serious it is, and so on and so forth, or are there mitigating factors such as no previous convictions or remorse or positive character, and all of that then has an impact on what the sentence will be. And in Huw Edwards' particular case, what happens, it was consistent. The other person who actually supplied the images was given a 12-month sentence, which was suspended for 2 years. And so it wasn't a surprise. I think all the legal commentators on that are saying, look, these are the existing guidelines. What's happened in this case, it is consistent with that. And those who basically have the sentencing guidelines will understand that's effectively how it works. It does call into question, is it serious enough? And any sentencing is supposed to be a deterrent as well as punishment, and make sure that people don't reoffend, to protect the public. Those sort of three factors. And that's a good question.
Now, the photo on the front of the Times this morning is Victoria Starmer, the Prime Minister's wife, who wore an Edelyn Lee outfit to the designer's London Fashion Week show yesterday, as her husband said he'd done nothing wrong by allowing a donor to buy her clothes. I've seen some people call this party frock gate. I've seen other people call this the Frocky Horror Show. What do you make of this, Andrew?
Oh, I think that's the best title. Frocky. I love a good pun. The pun is mightier than the sword. Frocky Horror Show, I think, is brilliant. It's very, very simple. It's all about hypocrisy, and everything has to be transparent. And the problem is, I always say that everything you do, everything you say will come back to bite you one day. And Sakir was so adamant in his basically calling out the Tories for every possible breach of the rules that they could do. When he doesn't do it properly, it is that hypocrisy. Basically, the rules are this. MPs are supposed to declare gifts and donations to the parliamentary authorities within 28 days of receiving them. He didn't do it in time. It's a timing issue rather than the gifts itself. And that's the whole point. I do think that our ministers around the world need to look right. And if they can't afford clothes and so on and so forth, people want to donate, then that's absolutely right. It's not the donation which is the offence. It's basically the failure to declare within the time period.
Yeah. And also, you know, if this were, let's say, Carrie Johnson when she was living in Downing Street, surely Keir Starmer, as leader of the opposition, would have been making a massive deal out of this.
Well, not only surely, he did, all the time. And other glorious headlines, I always love it. It gives all sorts of copywriters the opportunity. You might remember about the wallpaper. And one of my favourite headlines was Interior resigns. You work on that sort of basis. So Frocky Horror Show, I think, is up there with the headlines. The reality is exactly that. Be careful what you call people out on, because hypocrisy will come back to bite you one day.
And just finally, Andrew, Sadiq Khan wants to pedestrianise Oxford Street within 2 years. There's a great photo in the Times today visualising what that would actually look like. Is this what's needed to give it a new lease of life?
Well, I'll tell you what, there was so, and he talks in this brilliant article in the Times. If people haven't got it, go rush out and get your copy now. The reality is exactly that. It is my hood. It's round the corner from me. That's where I live. And I go down there, and they're right. There are so many of these candy stores and other bits and pieces. Oxford Street, which is supposed to be our proudest street within London, or one of them for shopping centres, is a bit sort of downtrodden and so on and so forth. Pedestrianising it and putting fountains in and so on and so forth is extremely useful, I think, and would improve it. The important point to people is always consult the shops, because the high street at the moment is in such a poor state. So many shops are closing, they're boarded up, which looks appalling. I see that in the article, Peter Roos, Executive Director at John Lewis, he said, "We're extremely proud of our place on the street and are investing significantly in our flagship. We're delighted to see the plans announced today to transform the nation's high street. Talk to the shopkeepers, see what you can do to help them out, but make it into the sort of Champs-Élysées and so on and so forth, the Times Square in New York. I think all of those sort of things could be very good, and it could help them, but consult everybody who's part of that process."
If they do it, Andrew, I'll tell you the best thing about it. It'll mean you can't have those bloomin' pedicabs going up and down Oxford Street.
Oh, they with all their noise and so on and so forth.
Honestly, I can't stand them.
Well, I run as a pedicab business, in my sideline, my side hustle. So, but
do you actually?
No, of course I don't, James.
Well, you're a man of many ventures. I didn't know.
Well, I have fingers in many pies. I own those pie factories. It's got to be good, but not pedicabs, not yet.
Andrew, always appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Barrister, broadcaster, futurist, pedicab owner, Andrew Eborn there. Good morning. It's James Hanson on Times Radio Early Breakfast.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.